Welcome to A Kind Life. Today I'm very grateful to have Bronwyn Currie here with us. How are you going, Bron?
Hi, Alicia. I'm terrific. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, my pleasure. So I guess I would just like to share with listeners how I know you. So more recently, I have been involved in the Animal Justice Party, and have been really excited that, you know, even in my short time there, you've had many different roles, taken on lots of different roles, and more recently, you are the lead Senate candidate in the upcoming federal election for AJP. So yeah, I think we're very lucky to have you, Bron, and I'm sure people will understand once they hear your story and what you've been involved in.
Yeah, so I am the lead Senate candidate for the Animal Justice Party, and I'm just so grateful for that opportunity. And and I'm really honoured to have met you and so many other wonderful people in our party and across the kind of animal advocacy journey. Actually, it's really heartwarming.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Bron, for anyone who may not have the privilege of knowing you.
Oh gosh, where do I start? So I'm a Melburnian. I've lived here for most of my life. As a young child, my father was an army officer, so we moved around a lot, including overseas. So I had I guess an idyllic childhood in many ways, because I got to see other parts of the country and the world, and that gave me invaluable experiences. It also opened my eyes as a very young child to some of the more unpleasant and sometimes quite horrific things that happen in the world. And I guess I was a kind of a shy kid as well, so it was difficult being in a military family and living on military bases, and just as you kind of found friends, you know, 2 years later or 3 years, you know, you're moving again. So I guess that was early childhood, but what that gave me, I guess, was an opportunity to be self-reliant and resilient. And I guess I probably spent a fair amount of time alone, but not lonely, and animals really were my friends. And I would find, even as a young child, I think my earliest rescue memory, I was probably 3, and I rescued a bird. And I remember my mother being horrified that I brought this injured bird home, because at the time, you know, people maybe weren't as caring as they should have been. And so lots of things like that. So I guess fast forward to where I am now, I can look back with hindsight and see that from a very, very young age, I was aware in my own kind of community and more broadly that there are animals and people who need help, and we need to be aware of that, and we need to have systems in place to assist them, and we need people to step up in order to do that. So I guess that really brings me to where I am now. I've travelled very broadly. I think at last count I've been to something like 38 different countries, which is terrific because I've seen so much of the world. I backpacked with my best friend. We had some amazing adventures. It was wonderful. You know, but I look back now and think, gosh, what was the carbon footprint on that? You know, and it's the younger generation teaching me you know, about those sorts of things. That noise in the background is my 60-year-old cockatoo, Joe, who's just reminding us that he's here in the background. I rescued him about 1.5 years ago, so he's full of character and often joins meetings and Zooms. So, you know, I have 5 children, and they are all amazing humans who remind me constantly that my generation has not been doing a terrific job looking after the planet. And so I'm driven, I guess, by them in many ways, because I want my children to have quality of life like I have. And they are already burdened with massive HECS debts. They are worried that they may never own their own homes. Will there be a planet to live comfortably on? All these sorts of things. So there are just so many things that keep me awake at night, and get me out of bed in the morning to find ways to improve everything really about life on this planet at the moment.
And so tell us about your vegan journey, Bron.
Well, I've been vegan for about 5 years, I think. I've been vegetarian for much of my life. Again, from a very, very early age, I never liked meat. And living on military bases, I was surrounded by shooters, fishers, and we often lived in areas where we were surrounded by animal agriculture. And I guess largely back then, you know, when I was a child, there were green pastures with animals happily grazing, and, you know, they really did just have that one horrible last day. Much different to the industrial scale farming that we see today. But as a young child, my father hunted, my brother hunted, and it used to distress me greatly to see animals being gutted, skinned. It was horrible, it was horrific. And it stayed with me. And one animal that is just I'm so particularly fond of is rabbits, and maybe that's because of what happened to me as a child, because rabbits was food for people in the country. And so my brother and my father would go out rabbiting, and they would bring, you know, these rabbits home, and I'd be upset, and I'd try and, you know, hug them, bring them back to life, and you know, and then be stained in their blood. And then the next day, you know, we'd have chicken stew for dinner. And I always understood that, you know, what's the difference between rabbit or chicken, right? I'm still eating some animal that's been killed. And it really upset me. So, you know, I guess at the time, I don't know, it was just a thing that kids hated peas, and typically, you know, a mother would go to clear the table and there'd be any peas under the plate. Well, under my plate would be lumps of meat that would refuse to set up arguments for many, many, many years with my mother, because I wouldn't eat the meat. And sometimes, you know, I was punished by, you know, being made to sit at the table after everyone else had left to chew the meat, and I would refuse to swallow it. So ultimately they gave up. So I was pretty much vegetarian as much as I could be until I was an adult. And that continued probably until the time I started having children. And I lost my first pregnancy. And so when I was pregnant, the second time, my obstetrician said, you know, my iron's very low, and I need to take iron supplements aren't going to be sufficient. And I didn't want to endanger my baby, and of course not. So I started eating meat again, and this will give my age away. It was just before the internet, so it wasn't something that you could readily check. So I went back to eating meat. And then something happens, you know, you just kind of fall back into old habits, and you forget to think critically and mindfully about what it is that you're doing. And so one of my children went vegan, and was quite a preachy vegan, and was insisting that all of the family must be vegan, and you know, was sharing all the horrors of the industry with us. And everyone kind of said, we don't want to be hearing this, so, you know, please stop telling us all the graphic details. And so I just said, you know, to the family, look, everyone go away and do your own research, and we'll just keep an open discussion about this. And because I'm the person who prepares the family meals, I just started making deconstructed dinners. So I would put every component of the meal on the table, and people would just take what they wanted. And then over, I guess, a series of months, I realized that no one was actually eating the meat anymore. And so I said this particular night, is anyone eating meat? And everyone kind of looked at each other and said, no. And I said, so we are all vegan then? And everyone agreed. And so the whole family was vegan, and we're talking about 7 people, so that's not insignificant, which was fantastic, you know. And I think it was the Christmas just prior to that, I'd gone to the supermarket to buy, you know, all the things for Christmas dinner. And honestly, I started to cry in the supermarket. It really affected me because it was just overloaded with the bodies of dead animals, and I felt overwhelmed and very, very upset. at the number of dead animals that were around me, and I went home and I said, we're having vegetable lasagna for Christmas. Is everyone okay with that? And everyone said, yeah, fine. And so we've all been vegan ever since then. Everyone is incredibly healthy. I think I'm the shortest person in the family now because I'm surrounded by these strapping tall vegans who are 6'2" and 6'3". So no one's suffering any dietary dilemmas from living off the grass.
That is extremely impressive, Bron. Like that, it started with one of your children looking into veganism, going vegan and trying to convince the family, to then all 7 of you. That's really incredible.
Yeah, I'm really proud of them, and they were open to do the research themselves and think about their place in the world and what that means. And I think probably more impressive is that they all went on in their different ways to work in animal advocacy. So, some of the kids are investigators, others turn up regularly to all the protests, some help me with the work I do. All really, really good human beings. I'm very proud of them.
And how did you go from being vegan to becoming an activist? What was that journey like for you?
I guess it took about a year. Becoming vegan was easy, really easy. And in fact, I loved it because it meant there were no more rules to eating the traditional way that we had. So it was actually fantastic, and I think our kind of taste buds came alive with different things and new ways of preparing food. And it was quite an exciting time. And I guess it was a learning period where I was understanding how much the animal agriculture industry had changed from when I was a child to how it is now. And that was all very eye-opening and terrifying and devastating, really. So I guess it was probably about a year. I think I'd had a bit of a health incident that made me kind of reconsider, reframe where I was at in my life and what was important and what wasn't. And then it was a Melbourne Cow Save event, and it was on the Swan Street Bridge in Richmond. And I went along there, and there was just, it reminded me of country trips, when we're in the car for a really long time on a highway and those cattle trucks would pass you by. And every now and then I'd see a cow on the side of the road and I think, how did that cow get there? Did they fall off the trucks? I don't know. Something happen to them while they were crossing the road? And, what I did to my poor parents, I'd have the car door half open flying down the highway because I wanted to get out and make sure that the cow was okay. And my parents screaming at me, shut the door, shut the door. And I felt the same way that day on the bridge. It really affects me emotionally because there were just so many trucks, truck after truck after truck of, cows, layers high. And I just felt this kind of desperation to save them. And, I'm running after the trucks on the footpath. What could I do? Nothing except hold my sign saying, make a better choice, stop hurting these beautiful animals. So that was kind of the first activism event I went to. And I really loved the principles of the SAVE movement because it was based on kindness, and that's something very, very important to me. And from there, I got to know the people involved in the SAVE movement. I went to all the Burke Street Mall events and the different rallies that were held at different places, and the vigils and so on. And I guess, that I felt like, I kind of found my place of where I wanted to be, and that, the sum of all my experiences had kind of brought me here where I felt that I could do something and that I could help educate other people to the way that animals were being treated. And it was on such a massive scale now in the world that we have to change. We have to do something different, and we have to be better, and we have to make kind of choices. So that was kind of my introduction, I guess, into activism. And then from there, I may or may not have done some naughty things. I'm not gonna.
Don't incriminate yourself.
I won't incriminate myself. But it was very, very important to me to understand about the industry, and I guess to see firsthand how animals are treated, because I didn't want people saying, well, how do you know? You haven't actually seen it. So I went and saw it. Look, I shouldn't have said, I may or may not have done some naughty things. I've actually built, through the Safe movement, contacts with people in the industry and have been invited into the slaughterhouses and seen it firsthand. And I guess I've received some criticism for that too, because people feel like I'm dealing with the enemy. But my perspective is that I have spoken to the people who work in the industry and heard firsthand from them. And yes, we're on different ends of the spectrum, but in the middle is that space where we can learn from each other. And I guess that was a pivotal moment for me in understanding how I can best protect animals in the political system, because understanding how those animal agriculture systems work is knowledge that informs us how we can break those systems down using regulations and legislation. And so that was really important to me, and I'm really grateful to those people in the industry who provided me first, that initial invitation to come along and to understand what they do and how they do it. And that informs me. And so that, I guess, gave me the kind of information I needed, for example, when the animal activism inquiry was on and we were making submissions, and I can speak firsthand about things that I have seen. So that was really important. So yes, so I guess, that from veganism to activism journey happened very, very quickly. And at the same time, I think, as we're in that era where we're all madly scrolling Facebook back then, and I saw an information session for the Animal Justice Party, and I was in my local area, and I thought, oh, that looks interesting. I wonder what that's about. So I went along, and there were some kind of notable people from the party, and it was a terrific information session, and it just brought everything together for me. And I pretty much walked out of that information session, a member, but B, a candidate in an election, which was a bit of a baptism by fire, but it just all made such perfect sense to me that yes, I can attend all the rallies and the vigils and bear witness and make posts on social media and do all the other things. But what is really going to change things for animals in this country and in fact the world is to have people in our political system who can enact or change laws to better protect animals, and not just in the in the animal agriculture industry, but all animals. So so that's kind of how all that happened.
And so, Bron, when you were going into slaughterhouses, upon invitation, I guess I can't even really begin to imagine how you respond in that situation, because, if you're there with a group of activists, it's quite easy to show or display your emotions and be a bit more raw and probably honest, vulnerable about it. But I'm guessing in that sense, when you're there with, industry members, it's a little bit of a different situation. I guess, how did you, deal with what you were seeing firsthand?
I guess I understood I was there in a professional capacity. And so I behaved professionally. And I was also very conscious, it affected me hugely is the short answer, right? How could you, it's the sights and the sounds and the smells. And it's awful. It's awful. And looking into the eyes of those beautiful, beautiful animals, and trying to impart part of my soul to them to say, I'm with you, and to not break down. It was really important to not break down there. I did so later in private. But there on that day, and I guess this is the other thing about the industry and the systems that prop it up, the people who work there, I can guarantee you, do not want to be working there. Many of them are migrants. Many of them are on, visas. English is not their first language. They suffer horrific injuries. These people have, a much higher rate of domestic violence and gambling and drug use, and it's horrible. It's a terrible, terrible system, and we need to do something about that. So going through there, yeah, I was mindful that particularly the people who work there were looking at us, you know, the crazy vegans who want to shut them all down and do them out of a job. So I was very mindful that those people are vulnerable people as well, you know, and they need people looking out for them too. So, you know, the system is the problem. The system is what we need to change.
Yeah. You mentioned that, you know, you went to your first Animal Justice Party meeting by chance and then you stood as a candidate. I guess, you know, have you previously had any interest in politics, or was it purely that you saw this as a way to make change for animals?
That's a very good question. Definitely, it's the way to make change for animals. And so I was very excited about that opportunity. I knew at the time that it was a small party. The chances of actually getting elected were pretty much nil, but it was an opportunity to educate the public about the party and what we're about and what we would like to change. So it was a terrific opportunity for me to spread the brand, I guess, about the Animal Justice Party. And I think I've done that really well over the years that I've been involved. No, not involved in politics previously, but always interested in politics. And I think as a child, I was a prolific letter writer. And if I saw things that were wrong in the world, I would write a letter to whoever I thought might listen. So my poor parents regularly received phone calls or visits from the council or the school council or whatever it was, because wherever I saw injustice, I made sure that I had to speak up about it because, you know, like I said, from a young age, I witnessed a lot of injustice and I wanted to change it, you know, so I have always had that interest. And I guess as a young kid as well, especially when we lived in Papua New Guinea and, you know, there were a lot of expats and my parents used to have, you know, these most incredible dinner parties in the 1970s, and there would often be quite notable people and socialites. I think my mother had Lady Susan Renouf when they were a bit tipsy dancing on the dining table one night at a party. And so I was always kind of exposed to people in political circles. So it was always an interest that I had, even though I technically wasn't involved. And I guess as well, you know, I had a fairly long career in the Victorian Public Service as well. So always interested in governance, governmental processes, things like that. So
yeah,
background was there.
And before we move on from politics, I would just really, I guess, like to know, you know, what are you really passionate about in this upcoming federal election? Like, what is your sort of platform? What would you like to change?
Ending live export is absolutely huge. You know, that has to be one of our main platforms. It's what people know of us. It's what people expect of us. And I think to have someone in federal parliament representing animals would be life-changing, not just for animals actually, but, you know, people as well. You know, particularly we know, you know, everything intersects, right? So the climate crisis is dire. It's absolutely dire. We're literally at the precipice. You know, we have to change. So that is high on my agenda. Like I said, you know, I have 5 children who are telling me, you know, is it worth having kids? Like, will there be a planet left for them? You know, what is their old age going to look like on this planet where everything is doom and gloom, you know? And it feels like, it is the case that our politicians are not addressing the climate change sufficiently to make a difference. So climate change, and of course affected by climate change, is our wildlife. Look at the Black Summer. You know, we lost 3 billion animals, and that's a conservative estimate. How is that possible? Look at the Lismore floods. You know, it was a once in a lifetime flood that happened twice in a month. it's just extraordinary. And where was the help for those people? It's not coming. So climate change is just huge. And ending live export, our government at the moment is trying to wind back on the agreement that they had for shorter seasons. It's got to be stopped. And of course, in there somewhere as well is acknowledging and making change around the way that we eat. We have got to transition to plant-based food, because the planet cannot sustain the animal agriculture that we currently have. And we just have to change it. We have to change it. So that's high on my list, along with righting all the other wrongs of the world. It's like, there aren't enough vets. People can't afford vet care. So animals suffer because people can't afford it. The cost of living is astronomical, and wages aren't rising. And women are the fastest growing cohort over the age of 50 for people experiencing homelessness. Well, how is that acceptable? It's not. We have to change that. So, we need more social housing. We need housing affordability. There are so many problems in the world at the moment, but definitely, my list is meters long. But ending live export and climate change and protecting our wildlife and getting an independent office of animal protection, right? And having ethics in politics. The Animal Justice Party is the only party dedicated to protecting animals and who has a solid set of values, and that's kindness, equality, rationality, and non-violence. Show me another party that bases everything they do on a set of values, particularly kindness. There aren't any. It's us.
And something I've always been in awe of, Bron, with yourself is that, you've been involved in so many levels. You've been involved in grassroots, but you've been involved in the parliamentary system, but also as well, I was really surprised and really loved to learn about, what you do in your local community, and also more recently in the last 2 years for March for Justice. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Community is where it's at, right? And I think especially during the pandemic, when we had those limits to how far we could travel, so our local area became our world, really. So community is really, really important to me. I think, from the time that my kids were at kindergarten and then primary school and secondary school, I've always been involved in the Parents and Friends Association, because I think when you are involved, your kids do better, the community benefits. You're constantly making contacts in community, making connections with people, because that's really what it's about, connecting, right? And so I guess I only have 2 kids left at school now. And during the local government election in 2020, I was doing some work with our local community centre where I live, and then they reached out and asked me if I would join the community. I lost that election, by the way, but the nice thing about it was that they asked me to come and join their committee, which I did so happily, because it's a beautiful little centre and it does so much good in the community. It brings people together, it connects, it recognises people who are vulnerable and tries to help them. And it's built on kindness, and it's beautiful. And I'm now president there, which I just love. And I feel like I'm not a very good president because I'm so busy, but they're all forgiving of me for not having a huge amount of time, but I'm very involved in what they do. And there's a beautiful team that runs that centre. And like I said, it's diverse. Our staff are terrific, and it really just connects people through kindness, and I really, really love that. And I think that's so important, because a lot of people, particularly during the pandemic, experienced significant mental health issues. People suffered extreme loneliness, and I think if you can reach out to someone else and make a connection, it really does make the world a better place. It makes you feel good about yourself. It makes them feel better. and there's nothing bad about it. It's all good, and it's a great thing to do. One of the other things I did during the pandemic, which I loved, and it took me back to my youth, I joined a letter writing program to reach out to people who were isolated in regional areas, and it was just gorgeous. I loved doing it. It was really terrific. So yeah, that was just another thing. And then the other part of that question was about the Women's March for Justice. Right. So I have always been a feminist, and I think that came from growing up on military bases and being surrounded by very, very patriarchal structures. And I think I always had an inner rebel, but that kind of patriarchal system I lived in probably confined me for too long, and I reached a point where I really wanted to break out, and I was always kind of pushing against the boundaries, and always, I guess, not being allowed to, because I wasn't a boy, and it has always irked me, and I guess it really did hold me back for a long time. And you know, going through life, and all of my experiences, you know, I married and I had my children. I got my career in order to be able to stay at home and look after my children. It was very, you know, traditional marriage setup. And I guess what I failed to realise over time that my self-confidence was eroded, and that I was actually married to someone with a cluster B personality disorder. And towards the end of that marriage, which was almost 2 decades, you know, I was a little more than a doormat. And then he started to have mental challenges, and so it was an awful time. It was a horrible time for me. It was a horrible time for the kids and our families, I guess. But I came out of it after a time of, you know, I had some reactive depression, because it really was a very challenging, difficult time. You know, that included some family violence and, you know, intervention orders and, you know, stalking, all the horrible stuff that we hear about. So I guess in moving on from there, and, you know, and with the benefit of counselling, I found myself and remembered the fighter that I was when I was a little girl, against, you know, fighting against injustice, recognising injustice, and you know, fighting for what's right, not just for me, for my children, and for other people who were in the same situation who couldn't fight back. And so I felt that very, very strongly. And I guess as a woman, you know, there's not a woman alive, I don't think, who hasn't experienced on some level some form of sexism, really, or misogyny, you know, the cat calling, the staring that makes you uncomfortable, you know, in any kind of space, you know, to the more, you know, really horrible stuff where you're being assaulted and so on. So I feel this incredible sense of injustice for women. So I saw the tweet that Janine Hendry sent out about, you know, after, you know, the goings on of Parliament, that were just disgusting and outrageous. And she was saying, how many women would it take to circle Parliament? You know, why don't we go and do that? And the concept, the thought just grew, it exploded, right? And it was a pivotal moment for this country where, you know, women were just feeling it so viscerally that this is our time, it has to change, something has to change, because literally enough is enough. And so the Women's March for Justice came out of that one tweet by Janine, and it just grew like wildfire. And I saw on a Facebook group that was started, you know, were there any volunteers in Melbourne who could help organise a Melbourne march? And I thought, sounds like my thing. You know, and I've organised plenty, you know, I think by that stage, I'm running Melbourne Fish Save, Melbourne Goat Save. I've done lots of other things, organised lots of events for different animal activism things, and, you know, school things, all that sort of stuff. So it all kind of culminated. And so I said, yeah, sure, I'm happy to help, expecting multiple other women would do the same. But guess what? They didn't. So it was me. And I said, oh, okay, well, that's a lot, but let's see what I can do. And so there was a terrific team of just brilliant women who were like the core national organisers, and they were just incredible. And I, you know, I've probably built lifelong friendships with some of those women. They're just outstanding. And so from that, I organised the Melbourne March for Justice, and it was just a magnificent moment in history, really. You know, that day in the Treasury Gardens, where we had over 20,000 women and allies there to tell the federal government that enough was enough with the way that they treat women. We want equality, we want it now, we want respect, we want equity. And it was just extraordinary. And I did it again recently. And again, up against the same sorts of things, because to organise an event during a pandemic was very, very challenging, because there were, you know, capacity limits and all the things that you had to do. So the first march was kind of at the start, I guess, of the pandemic, and the second one was just this February. And it was really challenging because, you know, people didn't want us out on the street. But like I said to the police at the time, and, you know, to anyone who was trying to shut us down, was you can't stop this. You cannot stop this. This is a historic moment where the women of this country, and over 100,000 women came out of their homes on that day. You can't stop this. This is going to, you know, be in, you know, in the history books for a very, very, very long time. And it was, you know, effectively the third wave of feminism, and it's given rise to some extraordinary young women who have taught us older women that it's okay to speak out and share your stories. And those bullies can come at you and try and silence you, but, you know, that's not going to happen, because we're saying all the things that we need to say, and, you know, we are just going to continue to demand change. And we're still doing that, because we have this terrible government that keeps saying all the things and doing all the studies, but not actually implementing change. And so this is why, with this upcoming federal election, we see this incredible growth in the number of women, particularly independents, standing for election. And I think it will just be an extraordinary, fascinating election to, you know, analyse it afterwards. It'll be really, really interesting to see what's happening. I guess the difficulty for women running, though, is that it costs a lot of money to run, particularly as an independent. And we know, because of the inequality that women experience, that a lot of women don't have the money and the resources to run. So we've already seen quite a few have to drop out, unfortunately, which is a shame. But again, it sends the message, and the broader message to the Australian voters is that, you know, this is a really, really important election. There are significant problems in the world, in our country, and this is their opportunity to vote for change. And to remember that you don't have to vote Liberal or Labor. There are alternatives. And one of those is the Animal Justice Party. And I think, you know, some people kind of say, oh, you know, but you're a single issue party, you're only about animals. That's not the case at all. As I've already said, you know, there are a lot of things that intersect. And so actually we are the party with values who absolutely is all about animals. We're the only party dedicated to animal protections, but we also care deeply about people and the planet. And all you have to do is look at our website and look at all of our policies and positions, and you'll see that, you know, we are about a lot more than just animals. So, you know, vote one for the Animal Justice Party. Particularly, I think, you know, if you are an animal rights activist or advocate, if you're vegan, you know, put the Animal Justice Party at number one, and then put whoever you normally vote for after that, right? If you put us at number 2 or 3 or whatever, it's meaningless. Nothing's going to happen for animals if you do that. Put us at number 1. It signals to the major parties that you expect them to do something about animals. And, you know, one of the things I said that we want to achieve most, of course, is having an independent Office of Animal Protection and ending live export.
I guess, Bron, for people that may not be aware, can you just explain how that works in terms of, you know, if they do put us first, and we unfortunately don't, have someone elected, how the system works, in terms of preferencing and how that benefits the party?
Yes, I can. I don't want to confuse people though. There is actually a fantastic video available exactly about that on the Australian Electoral Commission site that probably expresses it more clearly than I could. And also the Animal Justice Party has a video about that as well. But essentially, if you put us first and we don't get elected, then our votes flow to whoever you have put at number 2. So if you put, I don't know, Labor, for example, at number 1 and the Animal Justice Party at number 2, if Labor gets elected, the Animal Justice Party doesn't get any votes, right? So if you put us at number 1, the preferences flow to the subsequent parties that you list. And, I guess as well, when you go to the election and parties hand out how to vote cards, it's a suggestion on how to vote. We're not telling you who to vote for. That is entirely up to you. So you can follow our suggestion, or you can vote whatever way you want. But if you really want to make change for animals, the way to do that is to put the party at number 1.
Recently, I'm going to say won the accolade of Kingston Woman of the Year, which was a great recognition of all your service within your local community. So tell us a bit about that.
It was really exciting. It was lovely, actually. So I really felt very, very humble. And I guess, it's reflective of the work that I do in the community, across a range of things. It's the animal advocacy work I do. It's being the regional leader for our Southeastern Metropolitan region of the Animal Justice Party, being president of the local community centre. I was previously nominated for the Kingston Woman of the Year award and missed out. But as a result of that, I was invited by Kingston Council to be part of their mentor program for young women in the community. So that was amazing. I really loved that experience, and I'm still involved with that program, mentoring young women, and typically they're kind of year 11 high school students. And so I feel like I get far more out of that than they do. But I really loved it. So, and obviously, the work I do in women's rights as well. So it was a really, really lovely honour. And I was very happy to accept and was able to make a speech thanking all the people that I work with, and all the people who need our assistance, in making this world more equal. And I guess more than it being, an accolade or an honour, what it really gives me is an opportunity to continue the work that I do, and to keep speaking up about the things that we need to change, the things that we need to fix. So, yeah, it was a proud moment, but more than anything, it gives me greater opportunity to do more work.
Yeah. And so before we finish up, Bron, is there anything you wanted to mention that we might have forgotten?
I don't think so. No, we've covered a lot, haven't we? I guess, if you see something happening that isn't right and you have an opportunity to change it, do it as long as it, is safe to do so. I guess, I think I've done some things in my time that probably weren't ideal in the moment. I know when I was probably about 5, and we were living in New Guinea, I saw these magnificent giant sea turtles upended in the sun at a local market, and it really affected me. They were just, baking to death. It was awful. And I was trying to turn them over and, push them urgently back out to sea. And of course that offended the locals highly. And my father had to do some negotiations for my safety. So that probably wasn't the best decision, but I guess that was the sense of urgency that I had to help animals who were in a vulnerable position, and that stays with me. That's why I chase those cattle trucks and all those sorts of things. So I guess the most important message is speak up, and if you have an opportunity to take action, take it, do it, do something rather than nothing. You have probably more power as an individual than you realize, you know. And when we say, please sign this petition, or can you write a letter to your local MP, can you ring them, could you maybe go to their office and ask them in person, you know, because it's really difficult for someone when they're facing another person saying, you know, will you do something to improve this situation? You know, it really puts them in a position where they have to think about it, and you know, challenge their own thinking, I guess. So yeah, do something.
Yeah, I think it's great advice, and definitely, you know, I'm really excited to see. It's probably only, by the time this airs in, you know, a week or two, it's probably only going to be another month or less until the election. So really excited to see how your campaign goes. And I know that a lot of listeners will get behind you in terms of, you know, sharing your social media and hopefully being able to help and volunteer, you know, up the upcoming polling booth. So thank you so much. And if anyone does want to get in contact, Bron, what's the best way for them to follow your journey or ask any questions?
Oh, look, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can find me through the Animal Justice Party webpage, and there's I think it's info@AJP. Don't quote me, check the website, or I'll provide you with the link. And I'm pretty accessible, and I'm happy to, you know, talk to people, or you know, receive emails, however people want to communicate. And I guess that's actually a really good point just to finish off on, Alicia, is that volunteers are everything. They're our most valuable resource, because when it comes to the actual election, we need people handing out how to vote cards to voters at polling booths. And there's a period of pre-poll that happens for 2 weeks before the actual election. And we need people out there every single day at every polling station saying, vote 1 for the Animal Justice Party, you know, or vote for Bronwyn Currie in the Senate, those sorts of things. So volunteers are what we desperately, desperately need at this stage, because that's how we get people elected, and that's how we make a difference.
Yeah, and I'll pop a link in the show notes to, there's a great website. It's very easy to pop your name down to help volunteer, and you can indicate what you would be interested, like how you can help with federal elections. So I'll pop that in the show notes as well.
Terrific, thank you so much.
And to finish off, Bron, do you have a favourite quote that you would like to share?
Oh, yeah, I have 2. Can I share 2?
Absolutely, go for your life.
So I actually have 2, which is a little bit greedy, but they're both terrific, and they're words that I live by, really. And the first one is actually the chorus of a song by Missy Higgins called Steer, and it reads, but the search ends here, where the night is totally clear and your heart is fierce, so now you know that you control where you go, you can steer. And that came, you know, at a really difficult time in my life. And I realised, you know, I had to be fierce to fight for what I wanted, to fight for custody of my children. And it just relates to everything that I do about fighting for animals, fighting for fighting against injustice and so on. And the other one that I really love, and it's always stayed with me, and it's by someone I admire greatly, and that's Princess Diana. And her quote is, "Carry out a random act of kindness with no expectation of reward, safe in the knowledge that one day someone might do the same for you."
Like you said, you know, having that core value of kindness, it'll never go, like, you'll never go in a bad direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Bron. Really appreciate your time, and can't wait to see what happens in May for you. And yeah, really looking forward to just following your journey, and it's a very inspirational one. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.